I'd like to share a comparison done by myself um, of cultural clashes. An individual's worldview is often subconsciously determined by the background factors of cultural norms, the synthesis of culture informing an identity. The traditional expectations for an ideal parent are endless. I'd like to compare and contrast my ideas of a Ukrainian parenting culture with an Inupiaq parenting culture. Some of the things that I'd like to touch on are co-sleeping, self-soothing of infants, spoon-feeding children that are capable of doing so themselves, and most importantly, the respect towards elders. My goal is to communicate what I've noticed as the most important cultural parenting traditions that I feel should be held onto at all costs and passed down from generation to generation. Retaining one's culture through the changes that we go through in society may be very difficult at times and conflicting with cultures. Parenting in the 21st century has its advantages. However, some of these advantages are a hindrance in the eyes of elders. I feel that it is difficult to teach our children diversity when the Western culture doesn't embrace the differences of some of the native ways. I myself am Ukrainian and feel that as a traditional mother, um, my expectations are to be a housewife, always have meals prepared ahead of time, make sure that I'm catering them to my husband and children's needs and preferences, that I am parenting my children in discipline and have well-mannered children at home and also out in public. Ukrainian mothers are expected to stay home with their children, and growing up as a Ukrainian child and thrown into the diverse ways of the Western culture has really changed my mind on what I feel is ideal as a parent. Touching on Inupiaq parenting, I have come across several different articles that say really the way they're parenting is the native ways of knowing, something that's commonly said. I feel like traditionally they pass down knowledge through storytelling and more of observation than teaching it in schools or handwritten forms. Also, I'd like to touch on how important it is to respect elders. I feel like that is something that is in both cultures, not only in the Inupiaq. So, how many similarities did I come across in comparing the two cultures? Everything is my first answer that I'd like to say. Although every culture is extremely different, I feel very connected and close to the Inupiaq ways, especially after taking the interview of a few people. I feel that translating, even though you're maybe speaking the same language, I feel like there needs to be a translation of culture to culture. Saying the same sentence coming from two different aspects of culture can mean two entirely different things. I felt really close during one of my interviews with Samantha because it isn't something that you can read out of a book. When you speak to somebody and you can feel their emotions, and more I feel is portrayed when you're speaking to somebody and really trying to understand their culture. Some of the things that I found in comparison that I would like to talk about are mostly the similarities, of course. Co-sleeping is an interesting subject. I feel like the Western culture is very against co-sleeping for the majority. And I remember as a young adult, when I had my first child, the difficulties that I came across when I tried to let my child sleep in his own crib. And reading in some of the literature, I found that um, the Inupiaq culture feels strongly towards co-sleeping. They allow it. In one of the books that I read, they talked about how children that are even preschool age, they still sleep with their parents, and they kind of get bumped to the next room when another baby or another addition is added to the family. Um, Also, commonly self-soothing. I feel like part of why they carry, part of why Inupiaq culture carries babies on their backs and their coats or whatnot is really because they don't practice self-soothing for the child. Sprout mentions in her book how the Inupiaq culture is very apologetic when they feel like their culture is different from the Western society. When asked questions about self-soothing or spoon feeding or even co-sleeping, they were very apologetic when they were talking about their culture, saying things like, even having a nervous laugh and saying, I don't know how that child came, to sleep with me. I put them in their own bed and then they end up in in my own in my own bed. Um, I feel like Ukrainian culture is very similar in that aspect, where we feel very apologetic and unsure of ourselves. Are we doing the right thing by letting our children co-sleep? Or should we be, embracing the Western culture and changing our own personal culture to be more like the Western culture? Moving on, I'd like to introduce Samantha, somebody who I interviewed. She moved from Norvac to Anchorage the day after she graduated high school. She's a mother of 3 children, just like myself, and she does enjoy visits to her hometown. She mentioned that the heart of the community is really inside the church. She did mention, when asked what religion or if she practices a religion, she mentioned quite a bit about originally being Quaker. However, even though she didn't directly state it, I feel like she may be non-denominational more now, just through the different things that she said. And that was a really interesting conversation that we had with her. So the city of Norvac, where she's from, is a very tiny village up north. It's in the Nana region. The weather is very different from where I live in Delta Junction or Fairbanks, where most of the students probably are from. It is much cooler in the summertime. The temperatures are really between 40 and 65 degrees. They're right on the water, pretty much kind of between a valley of 2 rivers. It is a dry community. However, when I asked Samantha, she definitely said that it's damp. She says alcohol is bootlegged all the time to her city, even though it should be dry. And what they do is buy $10 whiskey in Kotzebue, which is a really nearby village, and then they share or sell that alcohol for over $100 at times. Samantha talks about how the simple pleasure of being in Kotzebue when she visits with her children, just the simple thing that the children can play outside and that families everywhere. It's a really small village. She's not worried about somebody being hurt there. They just kind of are free, and she kept saying how easy and relaxing it is to just be there with her children. And I see this in resemblance with the Ukrainian culture. Even though I live in Delta Junction, I feel like we kind of sometimes give our children more freedom than maybe is culturally acceptable in the Western culture. Um, I feel like children learn best from exploration, and it is highly encouraged in both cultures. In closing, I just kind of wanted to go over how impressed I am with the respect toward elders in the Native community. In doing my research, I came across an article where a young man, not even out of high school, was talking about how his experience was when he went to visit Washington, D.C. for the first time. Some of the students that went with him, his co-student classmates, were the first time out of the state. And it was an essay on what he experienced, and yet somehow into this essay, he felt the need and incorporated how important it is to respect elders. And I just found that very touching. Culture forming is something that just happens with evolution of society. And I feel like one's identity is subconsciously determined regardless of what you think you're going to be when you're a parent, when you decide to parent. Um, and I feel like new traditions are not necessarily bad. Mistakes are not what we make this country, but rather what we do with our mistakes that make the foundation of this country and what it can become. In conclusion, culture, gender, and identity combine to form an individual's worldviews. An individual's worldview is often subconsciously determined by the background factors of cultural norms, the synthesis of culture informing identity. I have grown up and accepted my strong cultural heritage into an image that has been created by my previous experiences and personal history. In summary, I have not achieved my personal expectations of being that ideal mother that I have created in my mind, but in other aspects, I have by far exceeded those expectations.